Hi guys, welcome back to Code Master Coach, your medical coding tutor. Guys, we're continuing our review of the 2025 ICD-10-CM official coding guidelines. All right, we're going to continue where we stopped, and we stopped on page 99, and we are at, let's see, F for follow-up care. Now, it first says, let's refer to the guidelines. F8 for follow-up care says the follow-up codes are used to explain continuing surveillance following completed treatment of a disease, condition, or injury. They imply that the condition has been fully treated and no longer exists. They should not be confused with aftercare codes or injury codes with the seventh character for subsequent encounter that explain ongoing care of a healing condition or its sequela. Follow-up codes may be used in conjunction with history codes to provide the full picture of the healed condition and its treatment. The follow-up code is sequenced first, followed by the history code. A follow-up code may be used to explain multiple visits. Should a condition be found to have recurred on the follow-up visit, then the diagnosis code for the condition should be assigned in place of the follow-up code. And it says the following follow-up Z code categories are Z08, encounter for follow-up examination after completed treatment for malignant neoplasm, or Z09, encounter for follow-up examination after completed treatment for conditions other than malignant neoplasm. So again, those two are going to be easy to remember as far as follow-up. Z08 is for the malignant neoplasm, Z09 is for all others. Code Z08, encounter for follow-up examination after completed treatment for malignant neoplasm, and Z09, encounter for follow-up examination after completed treatment for conditions other than malignant neoplasm, may be assigned following any type of completed treatment modality, including both medical and surgical treatment. Z39, encounter for maternal postpartum care and examination. So going back to my handout on follow-up, I just have a couple of notes. The first note says, think about the difference between aftercare and follow-up. Aftercare refers to continuous care, and follow-up means the condition is fully treated and no longer exists. So again, aftercare refers to continuous care, and follow-up means the condition is fully treated and no longer exists. So my little purple note, my Code Master Coach note, says aftercare means the condition still exists and needs treatment. But follow-up means there is no condition and patient is just checking to make sure the condition has not reoccurred. All right, we're down to donor. So let's go to donor on our guidelines. Donor. Codes in category Z52, donors of organs and tissues, are used for living individuals who are donating blood or other body tissue. These codes are for individuals donating for others as well as for self-donation. They are not used to identify cadaveric donations. So on my outline for donor, I just have my note that says, my purple note, I remind my students to write notes in your book. As you're learning these guidelines and you're going through this process with me, make notes in your book. And at code Z52, put a note that says Z52 should not be used for cadaveric donations, which means a dead person is donating. Don't use Z52. All right, we're down to counseling. Let's refer to the guidelines on counseling. Counseling Z codes are used when a patient or family member receives assistance in the aftermath of an illness or injury, or when support is required in coping with family or social problems. And in your counseling Z code categories, Z30.0, Encounter for General Counseling and Advice on Contraception. Z31.5, Encounter for Procreative Genetic Counseling. G31.6, Encounter for General Counseling and Advice on Procreation. Z32.2, Encounter for Childbirth Instructions. Z32.3, Encounter for Child Care Instructions. Z69, Encounter for Mental Health Services for Victims and Perpetrators of Abuse. Z70, Counseling Related to Sexual Attitude, Behavior, and Orientation. And Z71, Persons Encountering Health Services for Other Counseling and Medical Advice Not Elsewhere Classified. Now there's a note. Code Z71.84, Encounter for Health Counseling Related to Travel, is to be used for health risk and safety counseling for future travel purposes. So when you know you're going on a trip and you need some counseling about it, you're questioning whether you should take it, Z71.84. Code Z71.85, Encounter for Immunization Safety Counseling, is to be used for counseling of the patient or caregiver regarding the safety of a vaccine. This code should not be used for the provision of general information regarding risk and potential side effects during routine encounters for the administration of vaccine. So there's general information that's given, but when you're seeking, especially with everything that's going on now in politics, and with our new Director of Health and Environmental Control and his, he doesn't agree with a lot of our immunizations now. So we're probably going to see a whole lot more encounters for immunization safety counseling as to whether or not our children in the United States should be vaccinated as strongly as they are. So Z71.85 is in reference to more counseling in reference to immunization safety that parents will probably have questions about and whether or not they're causing more health concerns. I'm going to leave that alone. And in code Z71.87, Encounter for Pediatric to Adult Transition Counseling should be assigned when a pediatric to an adult transition counseling is the sole reason for the encounter, or when this counseling is provided in addition to other services such as treatment of a chronic condition. Now, if both transition counseling and treatment of a medical condition are provided during the same encounter, the code or codes for the medical condition or conditions treated and code Z71.87 should be assigned with sequencing depending on the circumstances of the encounter. So whatever the reason for the visit will go first. And then Z76.81, Expectant Mother Pre-Birth Pediatrician Visit. All right, we're down to number 11. Encounter for Obstetrical and Reproductive Services. Let's go to the guidelines. Now remember, this one's referring you back to the previous section, IC-15, on pregnancy, childbirth, and the puerperium for further instructions on the use of these codes. But because we're discussing Z codes, it's telling you that Z codes for pregnancy are for use in those circumstances when none of the problems or complications included in the codes from the obstetric chapter exist, and a routine prenatal visit or postpartum care. So they're not having any complications with the pregnancy, which would be an O code, and it's just going to be a Z code. So codes in category Z34, Encounter for Supervision of Normal Pregnancy, are always first listed and are not to be used with any other code from the OB chapter. So again, they're just coming in for their monthly visits, their encounters for their pregnancy monthly visits. Nothing's wrong, therefore it's going to be a Z code, a Z34. However, if there is a pregnancy complication going on with the pregnancy, it will not be a Z34 code, it will be a different code. Okay? And then codes in category Z3A for weeks of gestation may be assigned to provide additional information about the pregnancy. Category ZA codes should not be assigned for pregnancies with abortive outcomes, elective termination of pregnancy, nor for postpartum conditions, as category Z3A is not applicable to these conditions. The date of the admission should be used to determine the weeks of gestation for inpatient admission that encompass more than one gestational week. And then the outcome of delivery, category Z37, should be included on all maternal delivery records. It is always a secondary code, so make a note at Z37. And codes in category Z37 should not be used on the newborn record. I'd write that note at that code as well. Z codes for family planning, such as for contraceptive or procreative management and counseling, should be included on an obstetric record either during the pregnancy or the postpartum stage, if applicable. And then Z code categories for obstetrical and reproductive services include Z30, Encounter for Contraceptive Management, Z31, Encounter for Procreative Management, Z32.2, Encounter for Childbirth Instructions, Z32.3, Encounter for Childbirth Instructions, Z33, Pregnant State. Oh, and I want to make sure I clarified that. On Z32.2, Encounter for Childbirth Instructions, and Z32.3, Encounter for Child Care Instructions. And then Z33 is just pregnant state. When patient comes in for maybe a broken leg while they're pregnant, because the broken leg has nothing to do with the pregnancy, then it's going to be a broken leg code. But oh, by the way, the patient is pregnant. That's the Z33. We need additional code that identifies the fact that even though the patient's coming in for something totally unrelated to the pregnancy, by the way, patient is pregnant. So we need to take that in consideration. Z34, Encounter for Supervision of Normal Pregnancy. Z36, Encounter for Antenatal Screening of Mother. Z3A, your weeks of gestation. Each time the mother comes in, how far along is she? We identify it by weeks. Z37, Outcome of Delivery. And Z39, Encounter for Maternal Postpartum Care and Examination. And finally, Z76.81, Expectant Mother Pre-Birth Pediatrician Visit. Let's go to my handout and see what I have. Oh yeah, I've got a couple of notes here. The first note, at code Z34, which is Encounter for Supervision of Normal Pregnancy. That must be a first listed code. Make a note at Z34 in your book, in your code book. It must be a first listed and must be the only obstetric code. Because remember, if there's some other condition going on with the pregnancy, then it's just not a supervision of a normal pregnancy. Something else is going on. But if it's just a monthly visit for their normal monthly monthly checks while pregnant and nothing's wrong, they're just going in to follow up, make sure everything's going good. It's Z34. So be sure to put a note at that code in your book. Another note, code 3A for Z3A for weeks of gestation are not to be used with abortive outcomes, termination of pregnancy, or postpartum conditions. Because think about it. However far along the patient is, it doesn't matter. The pregnancy has discontinued. It's no longer existing. So code Z3A, which identifies the weeks of gestation that the mother is, does not have a play in these. So make a note to yourself that for abortive outcomes, termination of pregnancy, or postpartum conditions, do not use a Z3A code. Weeks of gestation are determined based on the admission date. What if a mother is admitted to the hospital on Monday at 16 weeks and on Wednesday she turns 17? I used to question, okay, she's still in the hospital, which Z3A, what weeks of gestation? Do I identify it as week 16 or week 17? And your weeks of gestation are determined based on the admission date, whatever number of weeks she was at the date of admission, okay? And then code Z37 for outcome of delivery is to be coded on all maternal delivery records as a secondary code and not on the baby's record. So I'd have two notes at Z37, that it is used on the maternal record as an additional code. It cannot be a first listed. It can only be an additional code. and it is not used on the baby's record. So please make a note in your book, because that's one of those tricky ones. All right, we're down to 12, newborns and infants. Again, refer back to section IC-16 for newborn perinatal guidelines for further instructions on the use of these codes. But these codes include, these newborn Z codes are Z76.1, Encounter for Health Supervision and Care of Fondling; Z00.1, Encounter for Routine Child Health Examination; and code Z38, Liveborn Infants according to place of birth and type of delivery. See if I've got any notes at 12. Nope, just refer to the guidelines because they're straight to the point. All right, next week I'll be back with 13, where we'll start with routine and administrative examinations. Thanks, guys. Following along with me, put these notes in your book. You'll be amazed how they'll help you whenever you use those codes. You'll have your little notes there. All right, guys, see you in the next one.